How's it going, everybody? RazingHel here, and today I'm going to be taking a look at the newly released patch for Civilization 6. On the 17th of November 2016, Firaxis finally released their first patch for Civilization 6, and there's some nice changes. There's also some problems, and I'm going to mention some of the compatibility problems that I've noticed over moving up to this new version of the game. One thing you should note is that the old game saves will work. If you've been working on a game previous to this, you're not going to have to worry about actually moving over to, or starting another one. The game save is completely compatible unless, of course, you're using mods or something to that extent. And if that is the case, I think I should also point out that the mods that I have covered previously in videos, they appear to not be working right now, at least. So for example, when I enter my city, I can't change the focus on anything right now in the city interface because I'm using one of the advanced interfaces for the city, and apparently, yeah, it has kind of borked some things. So if you're currently using any mods for the game, if you have modded any files, obviously the game still does not have mod support, unfortunately. There's no Steam Workshop for Civilization 6 yet. But for those of you who went ahead and did some tweakings based upon perhaps my suggestions even, yeah, you're probably going to have to wait for those mods to be updated. So keep an eye on them. And otherwise, up until that time, you could just try reverting the changes. I have tried reverting my changes, but it is not possible to kill them all essentially using what would be considered the easiest tool to reset a lot of mods, and that is the verifying the Steam cache for the game. That did not get rid of, in my case anyway, these issues that I'm experiencing. But there is a lot of good stuff, so let's start talking about it. The update adds a new UI to show where the next tile is that a city will grow to. This sort of feeds into the problem that I was pointing out. My mods have broken this because it's supposed to be able to show it. It would be highlighted in pink. I've seen screenshots of it. I'm not getting it, so one of my UI mods must have broken that. But that's really useful because a lot of times you're going to be in a city and you say, oh, I need to get this resource or something, but you're not sure if that's going to be the resource that the city tile expands to next, or it's going to be another resource over here, because it was never very transparent in that sense. And then it has been sort of that way since Civilization 5, so I'm not really surprised, but I'm not really surprised that that carried over into Civilization 6, but I'm glad to see that they actually are improving it. The ability to rename cities, if you so choose, which I know is a welcome feature for some. I personally am terrible at coming up with names, but that's just me. Hotkey support, for example, next unit, next city. If we go into options and then we go into key bindings, next city, for example, bracket, and next unit is comma. So it looks pretty standard, like what we had before. I was surprised that they got rid of it, to be honest, but that's sometimes things like that, small things like that, are overlooked, because when you're a developer, it's different than when you're actually playing the game. So in addition to this, we have the reduced effectiveness of cavalry production policies. Now, I'm only going to be covering, I think I should do this as a disclaimer, I'm only going to be covering the changes that I think are important, that are really sort of revolutionary and are going to make a noticeable change on your game world. So the other ones will, of course, be in the patch notes, and I will be including a link to the patch notes so you can go ahead and check them out for yourself if you haven't yet. So, when we're talking about the cavalry, I'm going to go here into the civics tree, and as you can see, the policy for, it used to be 100% production towards ancient and the classical heavy era, or classical era heavy and light cavalry units used to be 100%, has been nerfed down to 50%. And here's another nice little feature. A lot of stuff now that used to not link to the Civilpedia actually does. Now, I know the Civilpedia is far from complete, but this is still better than not being able to look at these at all, which was, before you had, it was really kind of crazy. You'd have to go ahead and type them into the search bar instead of the Civilpedia, the Civilopedia, I guess it's called. What else do we have here? But, oh yeah, the cavalry one is actually, the military policy for cavalry is going to be quite significant because, especially in multiplayer games, the cavalry are just so overpowered, especially if you're playing Scythia, which I'm currently playing right here. I figured I'd play what was formerly considered the most overpowered civ in the game, at least the early game. But this is going to make a pretty big difference for multiplayer games, and hopefully maybe it will just balance out the melee unit classes a little bit more, because I know up until this point there was basically no point in building melee units over mounted units if you had access to horses, and horses were pretty important. Increased counter spy operation time. Now I don't in this game have any spies yet, but I know this was a big enough deal to the point where there were actually some mods that allowed, there was a tweak. It wasn't like a full-blown mod, but there was a tweak that was being circulated on how to increase the counter spy operation time before you have to actually, cycle through your spies again and set them to do some counter spying activity. Units may no longer be deleted when they are damaged, and this feeds into another point that units are no longer, how do they put it? Deleting a unit will no longer provide gold. So they have heavily nerfed this. I know some of you might be disappointed because even in Civilization 5, you could actually delete units and get some gold back for them. And now it looks like you're not going to even be able to... That's interesting. You didn't turn into... Oh, they can walk on the Oasis without turning into boats. I think in Civilization 5, you needed a boat. Maybe I was wrong about that. But anyway, in Civilization 5, you'd get a little bit of gold for deleting units, unless I'm sorely mistaken, but in Civilization 6, you got a lot of gold, and that was a very easy thing to exploit, because obviously, if you're going to be getting gold for units, you can essentially have policies in place. For example, the cavalry one that I showed you, that allowed you to produce far more hammers than your city normally should when making mounted units. So you could essentially trade that in for gold. And Scythia, due to the fact that whenever you build a light mounted unit, you also get another one. It was a massive economy booster, I guess you could call it, if you just don't want to call it an outright exploit, which... To be quite frankly, to be quite honest, it was. So that was good, but I know some people are actually upset about this because now it is a little bit limiting because you can't delete units when they are trapped in certain locations, or if you have, for example, a ranger running about that's costing you 5 gold per turn upkeep on another continent and it gets badly damaged, that's going to cost you about 50 gold for it to fully heal up before you actually can delete it. So, it might be better to just try to run it against something and kill it off like that. And I think the main reason behind this change is because Firaxis, especially in multiplayer games, does not want you sort of XP denying other civilizations. If you're in a war with another civilization, they don't want you to be able to essentially delete your unit when the going gets tough for that unit. So in other words, you're not going to be sacrificing it against a city to damage that city and then delete it before the enemy could attack it and get XP from that attack next turn, or for killing it next turn. Especially with civilizations like Scythia. Obviously, if Scythia destroys an enemy unit, their units heal by about 50 health points, I believe. So, it was pretty significant that you could deny XP, and in Scythia's case, healing, simply by deleting one of your severely injured units. And most of the time, you were getting gold back for it. Matter of fact, all the time you did. You'd get less gold, but I believe you would still get a lot of gold. And the same applies to builders. You're no longer going to be able to take the builders and delete them. It applies to all units. You can't delete units for gold anymore, which I think is a good idea, but some people apparently were not totally on board with that. Units may no longer remove features from the tiles that are not owned by the player. So in other words, this is like mass deforestation outside your borders. So if you want to remove a forest or any other sort of feature like marshes or rice, you can harvest resources, you're going to have to remove it. The game will only allow you to remove it if it's in your cultural borders, which prevents some mass chopping strategies especially. Reduced warmongering penalties with the AI. This will actually make it possible where you can hopefully have some friendly relationships with them. I know a lot of games, and this is sort of carried over from the vanilla Civilization 5. The AI is incredibly broken in terms of diplomacy, in the fact that just pretty much every civilization hates you, and it's very difficult for them to get on your good, or get to them on your good side. Hopefully this will help balance that a little bit more, and there will be fewer instances of the civilizations flip-flopping on you, even though they were your friend one turn ago and then turning to an enemy because you joined you declared in a joint war with them, stuff like that. Here's another interesting, and this is a UI tweak and something I agree with, I'm on board wholeheartedly. So you'll see these resources on the map. Spices, that's a luxury resource. Cattle is a bonus resource. And then of course we have things like, I'm just looking over here, horses, which is a strategic resource. You'll see the little background behind their icon is a different color. So luxury resources have a purple background, bonus resources have a yellowish green background, and strategic resources have a red background, which is going to it's going to make it easier to immediately sort of pick them out on the world map when you're just looking at it. I don't think it's quite as pronounced as it could be, but it's definitely a step forward compared to what we had before. It made it very difficult before to actually distinguish them at a glance, to be able to discern what the differences between these types of resources were. Observation balloon range was being incorrectly applied when stacked. So you might remember this. I'm not currently in a position to demonstrate it right now in this game, but essentially what it was, and my trader is probably going to get killed by spearmen here. No, what it was is if you stacked enough balloons, it would give your artillery a crazy additional range boost, which apparently was not supposed to happen. And so now, thankfully, it's been corrected. They're not calling it a nerf because from what I understand, it was never supposed to be applied that way in the beginning. So they just basically balanced it out now, which is a good thing. They also, here we're going to go into the settings, and there are a couple of really cool options. And I say really cool because I actually did videos on these. So those videos are no longer applicable. But for example, here we have the interface. We can actually adjust the plot tooltip delay now, which is a much welcome feature because I, for example, want it to be like 0.5 second. 0.6 is good enough. This should have shipped standard because originally it was at 1.2 seconds, which is just too much for most people. You have to hover over tiles too long to actually get the information if you have to do it for an entire second. I did a video on how to do that before this patch was out, but now you can just simply do it in the options. So that's a great change. Another one is the auto cycle units is now also available in the options menu right here. Also in the interface options, we have the ability to enable or disable auto cycling units. This is also a change that I made a video about how to do manually before, but obviously it has been a much requested feature, I suppose, and Firaxis decided to finally go ahead and just include it in an update. So that video will actually be out of date, but I imagine it will still be applicable. It's just you probably won't want to use it. I mean, obviously just going into the options or the settings menu is going to be much easier than editing text files. So I think I'm just going to save this game here, and then we're going to exit back to the main menu and take a look at some of these other changes. So for example, I said for single player here, we can go create a game, and they've actually changed the leader heads. So in other words, it's not just a drop-down menu. It's still sort of is a drop-down menu, but there is a lot more information presented here. And this is pretty much, I think, a good replacement for what we had before. I did showcase a different one that was tweaked in a slightly different manner, but this is an equitable replacement for that one as well. And since it's baked into the game to begin with, I would no longer be recommending that other mod. So hopefully we'll have a little bit more information on how to disable some of those mods that were actually causing trouble with the user interface since this patch was introduced by Firaxis. But overall, this update has been received quite positively and is definitely a step in the right direction for Civilization 6. Hopefully we'll be seeing some actual DLC before the holidays, and hopefully after that we'll be actually given the SDK for the game, which will allow actual fans and players of the game to tweak it much more extensively than what is currently available. Civilization 5 did release an SDK as well as Civilization 4, so it has been a trend for quite some while now that, 10 plus years, that Firaxis would release such a tool, and hopefully we'll get that sooner rather than later so we can actually see some good mods start to come out for the game. And I'm not saying the ones that have come out are bad, it's just they're not as in depth as they could potentially be if the SDK was made available to the fans. So anyway, thank you very much for watching. I hope this brief overview was informative to you, and I hope to see you next time.